For the second time since July, Senate Minority Leader Republican Mitch McConnell appeared to have some sort of medical episode in which he froze on camera in front of an audience during a press conference. But before we unpack all that and the disparate response from Republicans and Democrats and President Biden, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, so first things first, Mitch McConnell is a terrible person. I don't think there's any which way around it. He has done, as I mentioned this in the video that we discussed when he had his first medical episode, he has done incredible damage to the body politic, to congressional norms, to the Senate. He has helped decay and corrode and corrupt the long-term health of what used to be allegedly the world's greatest deliberative body. Okay. Now, he is a different flavor of wickedness compared to other Republicans in that he's nowhere near as reckless in his own way as somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Matt Gaetz, right? There's a shrewdness to McConnell. And McConnell has in the past, again for shrewd, cynical reasons, worked bipartisanly with President Biden and other presidents. Not so much with President Obama. He was pretty obstructionist there, and he still has obstructionist tendencies even now under President Biden. But it is a different flavor, a more normal flavor of what I would consider villainy. But make no mistake about it, Mitch McConnell is not a net positive for legislation and for the body politic in this country, okay? That said, he suffered what appeared to be another medical episode. We're going to play a clip, and then we're going to unpack not only what happened, but also, more specifically, how people responded to it in politics, how sitting Republicans responded to it, how their surrogates in the media responded to it, but also how President Biden, Mitch McConnell's foremost political opponent at this point as the Democratic leader, how he responded to it. So let's see.
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator. Benny.
So we won't watch the whole thing. So Axios has reporting on it. Let me bring it up here. Senator Minority Leader Mitch McConnell appeared to freeze while speaking Wednesday at a press conference with an aide stepping in to repeat a question asked while the senator remained silent. And the question was, have you thought about running for re-election? And then he laughed and kind of froze. And when the aide came over and repeated loudly the question, he said, yes, he understood it. Yes, he heard it, but he was not able to articulate an answer and just kind of stared blankly ahead. Again, we saw that first episode in July. And apparently he recovered like he did in July. He was able to speak with allies and others within the hour or within a few hours. But that's the second scary public medical episode that McConnell experienced. Now, here is how President Biden responded about this. And again, this was asked to the president by a reporter, and this was publicized. And again, as a reminder, these two are on opposite teams. Mitch McConnell just made Biden's life a living hell when Biden was President Obama's vice president, because again, his number one goal was to make Obama a one-term president. As a matter of fact, McConnell was very candid after President Biden's election. He said he wanted to make President Biden a one-term president, right? So there's a lot of, despite a long history between these two men where each of them has claimed the other as a friend, there's also quite a bit of tension as well. But this is how President Biden responded.
Thank you all very much.
Any concerns about your friend Mitch McConnell's health?
By the way, I just heard literally coming out, and Mitch is a friend, as you know, not a joke. We always, people don't believe that's the case, but we have disagreements politically, but he's a good friend, and so I'm going to try to get in touch with him later this afternoon. I don't know enough to know.
So that was President Biden reacting with compassion and grace to somebody who has more often than not been an obstacle to his legislative agenda, someone who has, not done his best to thwart Donald Trump over the years. I mean, McConnell has been politically a pain in the ass, so to speak, and yet his first instinct to President Biden is to react with compassion, which he also did when McConnell suffered his first episode in July. President Biden reached out, and actually McConnell himself spoke about it. He said, "I just heard from the president," and then he even shared a joke. He said, "I told the president I was sandbagged," and he was referencing where President Biden himself tripped over a sandbag during some sort of naval commencement speech, even prior to that. So it was exchanging good humor. So that was the president. Now I want you to see a clip from Fox News and Laura Ingraham and a couple of like Republican affiliated guests. Here's what they have to say about the episode.
Question to his defense.
Oh, absolutely. I would argue, except for some of the Supreme Court stuff, which, by the way, great for him for blocking Merrick Garland, but that only worked because Donald Trump won. Great for him for doing the nuclear option on SCOTUS to get us Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett, but that only happened because Trump won. And oh, by the way, I just want to say something. I mean, I think Chris pointed out that Mitch was considered an expert in procedural stuff. That wasn't Mitch, and we saw that with his absence. That was the cloakroom staff and the floor staff. So I think Mitch is very much expendable. He's not with the base, and I think he's made it very clear that his priorities with Ukraine and other things have nothing to do with where the Republican base is right now. You ask who do I think is probably going to replace him? It's probably going to be John Thune.
So we'll just end that part there. But notice how these ghouls speak of McConnell, who, again, I've joked is like the eldritch abomination of the Senate, and he has certainly been a legislative asset to the GOP. Not that the GOP is really interested in legislating, but the shape of the federal judiciary, the fact that it's packed with young conservatives, that is because of McConnell. And yes, you can say this guy's trying to give Trump the credit because of course he is, but McConnell would have been able to do it with any Republican presidential appointee. If any Republican had been victorious, if it had been Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or whoever else in 2016, McConnell would have done the same thing, right? So without McConnell, Trump wouldn't have gotten his Supreme Court nominees. And it's just the whole thing. They speak of it so callously, and this is supposed to be their great ally, their great asset, but because he has deviated just enough from the MAGA cult, they seemingly have not only no use for him, but no respect for him either. They speak of him in the coldest tones possible. And if you look on Twitter, responses from like Marjorie Trader Green and others are equally callous. And then, of course, it begs another question, which is, how can Republicans make the case that President Biden is too old for his position when you have a situation like this? See, say what you want about President Biden, but we haven't seen anything like this. We haven't seen any sort of medical episode or anything like that. He's made his gaffes. He mumbles. He fell off his bike. But when he fell off the bike, it wasn't because he froze or had a medical episode. It was because he still had his foot in the strapped pedal, right? Otherwise, Biden is extremely fit for a man of 80 years old, constantly bikes, he's constantly working out. He's in better shape physically, I would bet you, compared to Donald Trump, who's 3 years his junior. But how can they make the case that Biden's too old for his job while still clinging to McConnell? And even though you do have many Republicans and their surrogates mocking McConnell and showing indifference to McConnell, I almost had a Harry Potter moment there, McConnell, and wanting to discard him. You have other more establishment Republicans, particularly in the Senate, who are closing ranks around him and saying, oh, he's fine, he sounds good, you know, we talked to him, he seems to be back to normal. So there is that hypocrisy as well. And I'll simply conclude by saying this. I don't wish medical illness or medical misfortune on anybody. And clearly there's something going on, I would expect, with Mitch McConnell's health, as there is with Dianne Feinstein on the Democratic side. But I just want to reiterate, I'm not going to beatify Mitch McConnell because he's going through this. He is a terrible person who has done tremendous damage to this country by his legislative inaction, basically being the grim reaper of legislation like gun control policies, you know, doing his best to thwart the Affordable Care Act or any sort of like universal health care and various other measures, obstructing President Obama in particular throughout 4 years, but even to some extent President Biden. And then, of course, what he's done to the court and the judiciary and the Supreme Court. That could not have happened or would not have happened without McConnell. And I can't just forget about that, and neither should you.